Well, hi everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of Adam's Music Box, where on this day in 1980, Led Zeppelin played what turned out to be the final ever concert because it was after that John Bonham sadly died. Now, Led Zeppelin were a band that were incredibly popular straight out of the gate. The debut album in 1969 went straight to the top. The second album came out that same year, and they were really, really on a roll. And they owned the 70s in many ways. It was a decade of classic, as we now call it, hard rock. And Zeppelin are typically mentioned as one of the most important, if not the most important bands on that list. So let's explore why that is. The first reason is diversity of styles. There have been many successful heavy rock, hard rock, classic rock, call it what you will, bands that more or less do something similar on every album. They might have seven sort of hard driving songs, one predictable ballad, and they'll call it a day. Led Zeppelin was never like that. They had some heavily bluesy songs. They had some very classically influenced hard rocking songs. They had some keyboard driven songs. They had some guitar driven songs. They had some acoustic songs. They had some songs with acoustic instruments where things like mandolin were featured more prominently than guitar. You had, even within that frame, some songs driven by the traditional organ, others driven by very modern synthesizers, the GX1, for instance, a beautiful polyphonic beast made by Yamaha. And John Paul Jones was one of the few people to actually play one when it came out, along with Stevie Wonder and Keith Emerson. There was also something unique about the drumming. It's become cliche, and this was really after the 70s that it became cliche for a hard rock drummer to just be sort of metronomic, hit hard, and be melodramatic, not in your playing, but in your appearance. And that, my friends, is boring. None of that applied to John Bonham. John Bonham had swing. He had soul. He was like a Gene Krupa, Buddy Rich type of character thrust into a rock band, and he made the most of it. And that's what gives Zeppelin such an organic feel. It's not this this crushing metronomic sound that beats you over the head. It was loud, it was bold, it was thick, it was fat in terms of its sound, but it was pure. It was a natural drum sound in terms of its production. We owe that as much to Bonham as Jimmy Page for being such a great producer. And most of all, that swing and that groove is what made John Bonham so unique. And it's why many jazz drummers, if not most jazz drummers, respect him, even though he's known for the hard rock genre, because he brought swing into hard rock. John Paul Jones is probably, in terms of technical ability, the most talented member of Led Zeppelin. He was the man who could and did play everything. So multi-talented. And if you YouTube some concerts he did in the late 90s, early 2000s, with his solo work, Zuma was one of the albums he released around that time. You'll be able to see quite clearly just how talented he is. But that came through without ever overpowering the more noisy members of Led Zeppelin. It nevertheless came through there very, very loud and clear, whether he was playing Mellotron, whether he were, as he did, Kashmir, driven by the Mellotron, or the clavinet, that drives trampled underfoot, or the organ, Your Time Is Gonna Come, or the GX1, Carousel, All of My Love in the Evening, or his wonderful bass lines, Dazed and Confused. The list can go on. What a great musician. Every truly great band needs a multifaceted virtuoso who's a no bullshit kind of guy. That was John Paul Jones. Jimmy Page, a true original. Yes, we all know that when he got high and sloppy on stage, that was one thing, but in the studio, he was a master of precision and organized chaos because he began about as far from sloppy drunk playing as you can get as a much in demand session musician. And he brought that knowledge of the studio and that discipline to Led Zeppelin on every single album, from his miking techniques, which took a less is more attitude to creating a big sound, through the way that everything was arranged, if you will, collectively. And Jimmy Page had a big part of shaping that sound that really made the band seem and feel alive rather than cliched and repetitive. And of course, you had to have your charismatic, screaming frontman, Robert Plant, who was great. And even though he got a lot of stick from some people, from the crotch shots and the shirtlessness, he was had a good sense of humor about himself as much as anyone. And far from being the kind of arrogant frontman to take himself too seriously in a Spinal Tap style, Robert Plant was a fun guy. And he had lots of fun on stage, even though in 76 tragedy struck when he lost a child. And that was something that he said he never really got over. And while that slowed Zeppelin down a bit, it didn't. The quality did not decline. Presence, the first album they did after that tragedy, was filled with the soul searching and the frustration that you'd expect from someone who had gone through such a tragedy. Now, of course, there have been sort of reunions of sorts over the years, from a disastrous Live Aid reunion to a much more successful one in the early 2000s, where John Bonham's son Jason was on drums, and there was even an event in the late 80s, I believe it was at the Ahmet Ertegun birthday celebration, where Jason played with the band. And of course, he did his dad justice and kept it in the family. But the original Led Zeppelin died with John, and that's something we all know. And that's why in 1980, on this day, they played their final gig as the original Led Zeppelin. Like, subscribe, and we will see you next time.